First 1,000 people have got these special wristbands that get you really close to the front, don't they?
And you go for a coffee, and that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Amazing. You're camping out there again tonight, aren't you, in your van?
Yeah.
If Liam and Noel want to come out and say hello afterwards, they're welcome to.
Absolutely. No, it's been amazing, yeah. I mean, the atmosphere, everything's just been so good. Like, couldn't have wished for anything more.
I feel like you seem emotional already. Will it be an emotional moment tonight?
This place, the atmosphere, everyone knows all the lyrics to all the songs. That's like unbelievable.
And it takes you back, I guess, to youth, does it, for you?
This is history in the making, you know. This is brilliant.
Yeah.
Have the best time, enjoy it. Look, we'll leave you with a picture of everyone out here. There's bucket hats everywhere you go. There's people selling tambourines, all sorts of things going on here. So I think people are very excited ahead of what's to come. The moment that Liam and Noel will be walking out on the stage at around about 8:30, we think, tonight. Lots and lots of excitement ahead of the big day.
And now for a check on the weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, we'll see a break from the heat and the sunshine over the next few days as low pressure moves across the country, bringing wet and windy conditions for a while. This afternoon, rain over Scotland and Ireland will spread into Wales and northern England. Western areas will see significant rainfall, but eastern areas will see light and patchy outbreaks, if any. Southernmost counties, along with East Anglia, will stay dry into the evening, although cloud will increase from the north. Overnight, cloudy, breezy conditions will spread to all parts of the country. Rain will persist in the west.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up next, it's Business Live with Darren McCaffrey. Darren, what do you have for us this afternoon?
Good afternoon to you, Barbara, and indeed to you at home. Yeah, coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be looking at 1 year of Labour government, what it's meant for the economy. It's been quite the week, quite the year in British politics, and some difficult decisions ahead. We're also talking to Michael O'Leary, the Ryanair head, who is pretty furious about the cancellations because of a French air traffic control strike, and we've got the latest from the markets. That and more coming up in Business Live in just a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Higher taxes on business and higher public sector salaries. 1 year on, we'll look at how this Labour government has fared in its handling of the economy. The government's latest U-turn on welfare leaves Rachel Reeves with a widening deficit to fill. Ed Conway will explain how she might do it. Plus, as hundreds of flights are cancelled as French air traffic controllers walk out on strike, we're speaking to Ryanair's Michael O'Leary. Very good afternoon on this Friday. Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. The government's endured a pretty tough few weeks with a series of embarrassing U-turns that culminated in the gilt market turmoil when Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, appeared to cry during Prime Minister's question time on Wednesday. And while Sir Keir Starmer struggles to control hundreds of unruly left-wing MPs, the polls are looking not great as the party trails Reform UK. So how has the Labour government fared in its handling of the economy as it marks 1 year in office? Well, delighted to say we can speak to Michael Brown, Global Investment Strategist at Franklin Templeton. Very good afternoon to you, Michael. What's your take?
Well, the weather's hot. Oasis are back, but it isn't 1997 again, is it?
That's one thing that's true.
Here we go. Yeah, no, I mean, the real issue here is what Tony Blair inherited in 1997 was 45% debt to GDP ratio, and that's up in the 90s today, which means that the room for government manoeuvre is really minuscule. So the question for the Labour Party over its first year in power has been how to muddle through. Could it square the circle of its political identity, which wants to spend more on welfare, spend more in terms of building public services, alongside that huge debt burden left by the Conservatives and COVID, it has to be said. And the answer is no, because we've seen this week on the backbenches and the backbench revolt that we can't square that circle, and therefore a new policy is required. Muddle through is just not going to work anymore.
It's not going to work, but is it fair to say, Michael, that actually, remember when Labour first got elected and they were talked about being doomsters and they were over-egging how bad things were? I was listening to someone this morning saying they weren't going far enough in explaining how bad things are. And you've made that comparison with 97. The debt ratio is incredibly high. It's fair to say public services are not in a great state. In the end, actually, Labour have had a pretty awful inheritance.
Without any doubt, it's a really poor inheritance to get. But to be fair, everybody knew that. Everybody told them at the time, and they questioned, why would you rule out raising taxes on income tax, on corporation tax, VAT? Why would you rule out the room for manoeuvre, the biggest areas of room for manoeuvre, if you want to spend more? Or why would you rule out defending certain areas of the economy, such as the NHS, for education and defence, and then try and put the burdens elsewhere? Well, we see that balancing act is just not possible to achieve.
So, and you suggested just then that kind of muddling through is not the solution. It's not going to work. What is the solution? I mean, is it more taxation? I mean, even the Prime Minister's admitted that you can't tax your way to growth.
Well, I think there are three processes at work here that you could go down. One, we could cut spending. Well, that's not in the playbook, so we can forget about that. Secondly, you can muddle through and hope for something to happen. Now, there are two things that could happen here, which are very much at variance to each other. One is growth could be much better than you expect, and growth could then obviously fuel better receipts, and therefore you'd start getting yourself back on track on the fiscal side, enabling you to spend more. Now, that's clearly the hope behind the actions on the capital spending side, where they've taken 100 billion and said, we'll spend 100 billion over the next 10 years. It's not going to move the dial in the next year or two. There's just not enough money. The other part of muddle through could be that the economic position of the globe is that much worse in 25 and 26. It enables you to make really big rate cuts. And when I say big rate cuts, I'm not talking about 75 basis points or a cut a quarter. I'm talking about getting down to 2.5% and 2%. And I don't know if you've seen it, Alan Taylor, the member of the NPC, has just come out this afternoon saying pretty much that there is a real possibility of being able to do that.
OK, Michael, great analysis, as always. And given the fact that it's sunny here down in Brighton, I do hope you're wearing shorts under that desk rather than trousers and you're going to head straight to the beach. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks,
Good afternoon, Michael Brown there. Thank you. Now, the government's climb down over the welfare reforms has left a lingering headache for Rachel Reeves, who's just been hearing about there. How do you plug that multi-billion-pound black hole for the nation's finances? Well, Ed Conway has been having a look at the Chancellor's options.
Is the Chancellor facing yet another black hole? That's one of the things that markets certainly were conscious of when they saw her in the House of Commons and just reacted to it. And it was quite a reaction. Have a look at this, OK? This is showing you where UK 30-year government bond yields, basically the rate at which the government borrows, the higher that is, the greater the rate they are charging the UK to borrow. That's where they were before Prime Minister's questions. Then people saw Rachel Reeves and just look. They jumped to conclusions and look at what happened. So they pushed it up, and that's basically people getting nervous out there in markets. Then you had Keir Starmer making his statement, backing the Chancellor, and then it came down. It's kind of crept up a bit since, but this is really striking. It's really striking. Understandably, a lot of people have asked the question, was that another Truss moment? Well, I'm going to give you a chart that compares that. Very simple. I'm going to take this line here and just show you how much there was of an increase in the following days, and we'll compare that to the Liz Truss moment. So this is Rachel Reeves just the last couple of days and how much that 30-year government bond yield went up and then came down. And here's what happened after the mini-budget. So you can see actually it kind of was a bit lower at first, but then it kind of shot up. And what this isn't showing you is in the following days, it went higher and higher and really only started to come down once Kwasi Kwarteng left office. So it's not the same. It's not the same in terms of the market reaction, but still, people are definitely nervous. And the reason they're nervous is they look at the public finances and they say, well, you haven't left yourself much room. And it comes back to this. The government has a set of fiscal rules. Against those rules, it's got a certain amount of leeway it's left itself. This is what people call headroom. It's against the fiscal rules, but it says it wants to keep to the rules. And right now, that headroom stands at about £9.9 billion. And here's the key thing. When you start assuming that some of these plans to cut welfare, for instance, or indeed pension payments aren't going to happen, then suddenly it costs more. So winter fuel payments, that means you've got a hole of an extra £1 billion. Getting rid of all of those, the rules are still intact, but nonetheless, it takes that down. If you had assumed that those welfare reforms aren't happening, which we now know they couldn't get them through, that's another £5 billion or so, a little bit more than £5 billion. So all the time, you're whittling down the amount of headroom you have and heading kind of perilously close to zero. And all of that matters, but what matters even more is what happens to the wider economy, because if economic growth disappoints, then you're in big trouble. And here's really the critical thing, OK? This is showing you where the OBR, so the official government growth forecasts are this year, next year, the year after that, the higher the bars are, the more growth. And the more growth you have, the more money's coming in. So if those bars go down, that's a problem. I'll show you that in a second. Compare where the OBR thinks growth is going to be in the next few years to everyone else. So this is the Bank of England and independent forecasters. It kind of looks like it's just about right this year. But look at the next couple of years. Look at 2026. It's way more optimistic than pretty much everyone else. 2027, similar story, not quite so much. But that matters, because if that bar has to go down, then you've got less tax revenue coming in. And this is the thing that I think will really unnerve the Chancellor. If you assume that you're coming down only a weeny bit, maybe 0.1 percentage points in terms of your long-term productivity trend, look at what happens to this bar. This is all based on the economic growth forecast being downgraded. And that's a really small downgrade. If it's kind of a bigger growth forecast, the fiscal rules aren't just broken, but they're broken by an awful lot. And that is the challenge facing the Chancellor. If she wants to get, you've got a £10 billion shortfall there, but actually if she wants to get it all the way up to there, then you are talking about potentially £20 billion. And that is the black hole a lot of people are talking about.
Now, air traffic controllers in France have walked out in protest again today, forcing airlines to cancel around 1,500 flights. The strikers have seen Ryanair cancel 486 flights, and we're expecting that number to rise. Nearly 300,000 travellers are being affected. The controllers claim that they're worried about staff shortages and ageing equipment. Well, earlier I asked the chief executive of Ryanair, he's pretty angry, Michael O'Leary, about the impact that these cancellations are having.
Between yesterday and today, we've had to cancel just over 400 flights. About 72,000 Ryanair passengers have their flights cancelled needlessly by this recreational striking by French air traffic control. And the point we've been making both to the UK government and also to the European Commission is if you protected overflights, you kept the airspace over France open, about 360 of those 400 flights cancellations would be able to operate yesterday and today. About 60,000 of the 70,000 passengers would not have their flights disrupted. We've previously addressed this issue with Heidi Alexander. We continue to call on Ursula von der Leyen. Why are you not protecting these overflights? Why is the single market for air travel being disrupted by a tiny number of French air traffic controllers? And all we get is a shrug of their shoulders and nothing we can do. We point out there is. The Spanish, the Italians and the Greeks use minimum service legislation to protect overflights. They cancel local domestic flights. The problem is that the French do exactly the opposite. They protect the local domestic French flights and cancel all the overflights. And this is manifestly unfair. And we are calling on Ursula von der Leyen, who preaches about competitiveness and reforming Europe. If you're not willing to fix or protect overflights, then quit. And let somebody more effective do the job.
Do you think, though, when they talk about staff shortages, they talk about ageing equipment, and we know air traffic controllers are under pressure sometimes, and we've seen, look at what happened in the United States earlier on this year, and they're now looking at their air traffic control system and the pressures it's under. If there are concerns about safety, people have got the right to go out on strike, haven't they?
They do have the right to go on strike. We accept that. What they don't have the right to do is to close the sky. That's a French government decision and a failure of the European Commission to protect the single market. Trainmen regularly go on strike, but you don't close the railway lines. You don't close the motorways. We don't allow the shipping lanes to be closed. Why do we allow the sky over France to be closed just because a tiny number of French air traffic controllers want to go on strike?
But just on the principle basis of, do you accept that there may be concerns in air traffic control about a lack of staff, about staff being overworked, about the equipment being a bit out of date?
Absolutely not. These are the most underworked, overprotected labour force in Europe. They have modern equipment. The thing is, they go on strike every year in June and July in France. These are air traffic controllers, simply because it's recreational. 2 years ago, they were complaining they went on strike for 53 days because of Macron's pension reforms, which didn't even apply to them. Last year, they were striking because, I think, in protest over some other Ukraine. This year, they can't think of what else to strike. So, lads, what can we strike over? Oh, yeah, we think we're understaffed and we think that we're using old equipment. Now, the equipment is new. And if they're understaffed, the way to deal with understaffing is not to walk off the job and go on strike. It's to hire more air traffic controllers.
Okay.
So this nonsense that they're overworked or using old equipment is just that nonsense. It's simply another excuse for these guys to go on recreational striking, but they're entitled to do that. What we're entitled to expect, though, is that Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary in the UK, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Union, will take steps to keep the skies open. Cancel the local French flights if you want to have French strikes, that's fine. But you shouldn't be cancelling flights going from Germany to Spain or from the UK to Italy.
Okay.
That is manifestly unfair, and we don't need French air traffic controllers to operate those overflights. We just need Ursula von der Leyen to get up off her well-paid backside and do something.
OK. Well, hopefully she'll be listening and your message get across, and indeed the Transport Secretary too. I just want to talk about a couple of other things, if I may, Michael. First of all, just in terms of baggage, because there'll still be people travelling with Ryanair this weekend, and you're changing the baggage allowance. How quickly is that going to come in, and why have you done it?
The European Union recently, about 2 weeks ago, agreed new rules for minimum bag sizes. They came up to the size of Ryanair's current bag allowance. We've always wanted to be slightly bigger, have a slightly bigger free carry-on bag allowance than the industry standards, and so we're adjusting ours upwards again. So starting in about 3 weeks' time, which gives us time to put new stickers on our baggage carousels, the free carry-on bag for every passenger on Ryanair will be 40 centimetres by 30 centimetres by 20 by 25 by 20. Is that right? Oh yeah, 40, 30 by 20. It's about an increase of about 20% on our current free bag. And we have it in place across the system within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
OK, 2 or 3 weeks, so passengers have to wait. Let's talk about a little bit of politics here in the UK. It's 1 year since Labour got into power. What did you make of events this week with Rachel Reeves crying in the Commons, the reaction of the markets, the idea that Labour hasn't necessarily got the fiscal discipline that it claims it came into office to try and restore?
Well, I think it's clear they don't have the fiscal discipline. You know, I mean, Labour arrived into office, said that the numbers were far worse than they had than they originally thought, and yet the first thing they did was come up with a massive pay increase for train drivers, who were already overpaid in the UK, and a massive increase for health service workers. Now, to be fair, I would support the health service workers. I had very little sympathy for the train drivers. But, you know, as with all Labour governments, they're pretty poor at controlling spending. The UK is facing significant fiscal challenges, not least the commitment to raise defence spending. But, you know, this is a government that will be in place for 5 years. We do wish them well. We needed to change the incompetent Tory administration of the last 5 or 10 years, the morons who voted in favour of Brexit. And the UK, the way forward, is closer ties with the European Union and a free trade deal with the US. They seem to have got the bones of a free trade deal with the US. What they now need is a much better or much closer both trading ties with the European Union and restore the free movement of people between the UK and Europe. The idea that they control their borders has been shown to be a complete failure. And yet, you know, Farage and his crew, who were advocating Brexit and should be hanging their heads in shame, are riding high in the polls because he's moved on to something else again.
That's true. I mean, I've noticed that you've talked about air traffic controllers being overpaid, Ursula von der Leyen, public sector workers. What about yourself? I hear that you've pocketed bonuses of more than 100 million euros, the largest in European corporate history. Frankly, are you worth it, Mr. O'Leary?
Absolutely. I'm one of the most underpaid chief executives in Europe. If I double the share price of Ryanair, in 2028, I will get to buy share options that could be worth about 100 million. I contrast that with Premiership footballers getting paid about 25 million a year. My bonus scheme runs over 10 years, so it's the equivalent of about 10 million a year. Okay. And hedge fund managers in London taking home 100 and 200 million a year. So you're worth it. You're worth it. Underpaid and underappreciated, Darren.
And just very finally then, are you going to take a holiday? Where does the boss of Ryanair go on holiday this summer?
And the boss of Ryanair stays at home here in Ireland because we're busy during the busy summer season trying to make sure all these flights run on time despite the French air traffic controllers. And then hopefully I can persuade Mrs. O'Leary to go down for a weekend in the sun in Portugal later on in September, October when the children go back to school.
Never short of an opinion, is he, Michael O'Leary there? Right, you're watching Business Live. Up next, we're going to look at how the markets are doing this afternoon. FTSE unchanged. All the details up next.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robin, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Very welcome back to Business Live. Let's have a look at how the markets are doing on this Friday afternoon. Joshua Mahoney is Chief Market Analyst at Scope Markets. Joshua, very good afternoon to you. We must talk about the big, beautiful bill, as Donald Trump keeps calling it. But it is a big political triumph for the US president.
Undoubtedly so. I mean, look, how beautiful this bill is depends on who you're asking. Certainly, this appears to benefit the wealthier segment of the US compared to the less well-off. But ultimately, from a market perspective, we're talking about an extension of those tax cuts for businesses, tax cuts for some individuals. That does lift sentiment within equity markets. But if you look at futures, of course, today, Independence Day over in the US, but equities within Europe underperforming. Equities within the US expected to be weaker on Monday. Part of that could be down to the expectation that this is going to ramp up the debt levels in the US. But more so, it's going to be the case that we're now focusing in on tariffs with that 9th of July reciprocal tariff deadline looming.
Yeah, and I see the European Union this afternoon suggesting negotiations aren't going terribly well. But at the same time, seen lots of facts today saying that these tariffs are raising genuine money, tens of billions of US dollars.
Undoubtedly so. And ultimately, we've now reached a point where, it wasn't long ago that the Europeans were saying, we've got measures lined up that we're going to retaliate with. Now they're saying, OK, we'll accept your tariffs at 10%, but can we negotiate on the automobile tariffs and the like? Perhaps the US won't accept that, but certainly countries are now starting to realize that maybe they will have to swallow these tariffs in some format. But certainly the Europeans now realizing they've got very little time and arguably it's not necessarily going to happen by the 9th of July. And the question mark now is, do we see Trump kick that deadline down the road once again, or do we see these tariffs imposed? And if they do, then it's likely that we're going to see inflation fears rear their head once again and potential recession fears rearing their head. So certainly volatility ahead and lots of question marks around tariffs just at the moment that we should be celebrating the so-called big, beautiful bill.
Well, but at the same time, you look at inflation hasn't gone up by as much as people expect. The jobs numbers yesterday were pretty good in the United States. I mean, he clearly feels quite emboldened, as in maybe the US is more resilient than, despite the turmoil that we think it is.
Yeah, undoubtedly, yesterday's jobs market was a boost for equity markets. Essentially, those calls for a recession going out the window. Notably, that 147K number, roughly half of them were government jobs. So certainly once you start to dig deeper into the numbers, they're not necessarily as impressive, but we saw lower unemployment. That, of course, is welcome. It does mean the Federal Reserve, once again, have very little incentive to move over the near term. So Jay Powell's probably going to be getting in the ear from Donald Trump once again. But now markets looking more towards 2 rate cuts for the remainder of the year. And ultimately, the question marks remain over the tariffs. If we see these tariffs extended further into the future, great. But ultimately, the Federal Reserve needs certainty. And until we see clarity over those tariffs, the threat of inflation looms large. Because if we see those numbers ramping up, that of course, has to have some sort of consequence.
Thank you, as always. Joshua Mahoney there. Thank you. OK, that's it from me on Business Live for the moment. We're back, of course, on Monday. Up next, it's the News Hour with Jonathan Samuels, including coverage of Oasis' first concert in 16 years. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here.